This is the fifth installment of Anglicans You Didn't Know You Knew. And in this series, I'm introducing Anglicans to Americans. These are great historical figures that the Anglican Church has produced and that Americans have really greatly been influenced by. Some have been foundational to the founding of our country. Some have been foundational in helping shape the American life or the American government or the American education system. Some, like today, our Anglican for today, have been great contributors to the American songbook. If you are an American, the Anglican Church, the Anglican faith, is part of your cultural, your historical, and your religious, and even your musical heritage. So today I want to briefly present to you John Newton. John Newton was born in 1725, died in 1807. He began his career as a sailor and a slave trader. Most people do know that much about him. He eventually becomes an Anglican priest and an outspoken abolitionist after quite a dramatic conversion in his life. John Newton was born in Wapping, London, and he's the only child of John and Elizabeth Newton. And as a young man, Newton was raised in the Reformed faith. His mother was instrumental in his life. She's the one that taught him how to read the Bible, taught him how to pray. His mother prayed very earnestly that he would one day actually become a minister. When John was 7, however, his mother dies of tuberculosis, so sadly she does not get to see that happen. He was not very close, unfortunately, with his father and the eventual stepmother that his father would marry. So much of his Christian learning, much of his Christian education, and his faith kind of comes to a halt, kind of stalls at this point in his life. From about ages 11 to about 17, he accompanies his father on sea voyages. His father's a Navy captain for the Royal Navy. His father retires later on, and he sets out to get young John a job in Jamaica. Wants him to go down into Jamaica and work as a slave plantation overseer. So in the meantime, John's desire himself is to marry. He wants to marry Mary Catlett. He meets Mary on a visit to Kent, where some family and friends were living at the time. He meets her there. So he stays a little longer than he should have, and he misses that ship to Jamaica. Whether that was purposeful or not, we don't know. This doesn't sit well with his father, however, so to discipline John, he forces him to join to become a sailor. So at age 19, John Newton has to join the British Royal Navy. John wants himself, rather, to be with his beloved Mary, so he deserts the Navy. He's later captured by the Navy, and he is chained, flogged, and then eventually discharged from the Navy there. He would later say about himself that at this age he was an arrogant, rebellious boy, and he lived a very sinful and reckless life. So he did come to regret that behavior. Newton ended up taking a job with a slave trader on an island off of the west coast of Africa near Sierra Leone. There he's treated really harshly there, brutally. He ends up sort of living in kind of impoverished conditions and living this very hard life. And so more than a year goes by of this sort of harsh living, and in 1747 he manages to actually escape the island. He escapes there. He catches a ride on a ship called the Greyhound that's based out of Liverpool. By this time, he begins on the ship. He begins to read the Bible again. There's not many books on the ship. He begins to pick up the Bible, but he also will read Thomas à Kempis's book, The Imitation of Christ. That's one of the very few books that are on the ship along with the Bible. In February 12th of 1750, John Newton returns to England. He marries Mary Catlett as he wanted to the whole time. He remains devoted to her until she dies. John Newton serves as the captain after this to 2 different slave ships over the next 5 years or so. Eventually he comes, however, to really hate slavery. He just hates the whole institution. He very much later on in life regrets his involvement in it, and he turns very much to fight against it very, very fiercely. Later in life, he passionately would support William Wilberforce, another name you would know, another abolitionist there. He supports William Wilberforce and his whole campaign to end slavery in England. He also writes thoughts upon the African slave trade in 1787. He writes that, and that's kind of a tract or a pamphlet promoting abolition. On March 12th, March 21st, 1748, on a ship full of slaves, this is where it begins to get very interesting. On a ship full of slaves, it's heading for England, a violent storm comes up and it's severely pounding the ship. John is down below. He's awakened from sleep, and he begins to help them bail water and do other things that you do in a storm-tossed ship. One sailor has actually already fallen overboard at this time, so they're all pretty positive the ship is in trouble. Newton and everybody on board are quite positive they're going to die. And so John Newton begins to pray. He sort of says he whispered prayers to God, recalling a lot of Bible verses from what his mother taught him when he was young. His mother taught him a great deal about God's grace, and so he appeals to God's grace towards sinners at this time in his prayers. For the rest of his life, Newton would remember this day as the anniversary of his conversion, actually aboard this ship during this storm. That's the hour I first believed, he said. It would take several months, however, for John to lay aside his slave trading and ship-faring life. And of course, because this would coincide with his faith kind of being more firmly established. In his autobiography, An Authentic Narrative, he publishes in 1764, John Newton writes of a serious episode, he would say, of backsliding at that time. But he said, but God's hand was in this as well. So he knew that understanding God's grace and God's providence, that God's hand is even in the bad times in our lives when we're backsliding, God is at work in us as his people. John suffers from a fever at this time, and when he finally sort of breaks that fever, comes to his senses, and he says at that time is when he really wholly and completely surrendered himself to God. He says from that time forward, he experienced a new kind of spiritual freedom, and he never again went back on his faith. In 1755, he leaves the maritime trade, and he takes a very well-paying job as a tide surveyor there in Liverpool. In his spare time, Newton would attend church, and he became acquainted with the preachers, names you might know, George Whitefield, another Anglican preacher from the Great Awakening period, and of course John Wesley, who again would found Methodism. He studies theology, he studies Greek, he studies Hebrew, and becomes proficient in the languages. In 1764, he's now age 39 or so. He is ordained as an Anglican priest in the Church of England. He takes over a little parish in Olney, which is in Buckinghamshire in England. He's 16 years in that parish, and during this time, this church grows immensely from his preaching and his teaching and his leadership under his care. He begins there also to write hymns, and you know where this is probably what you've been waiting for. He wrote hymns to complement sermons that he was going to write. He wrote hymns sometimes to complement an issue that parishioners or a parishioner was having even. It was quite an honor to have that written for someone. So some of Newton's most notable contributions are glorious things of thee are spoken. That would be hymn number 385 in the 1940 hymnal, Glorious Things of Thee Are Spoken, and of course, How Sweet the Name of Jesus Sounds. That one is hymn number 455, also in the 1940 hymnal. And of course, lastly, and most importantly, we all know he wrote the hymn Amazing Grace. In 1779, John Newton is invited to become the rector of another church, St. Mary Woolnoth, in one of the most esteemed parishes in London. So all across England and beyond, people are flocking to hear John Newton preach now. He's becoming quite a celebrity. They're coming to sing his hymns, and they're always also coming to receive spiritual advice. He serves that parish in London until his death in 1807, in fact. Toward the end of his life, Newton, he develops blindness, but he continues to preach, even though he develops blindness. He continues to preach. William Wilberforce, upon his conversion in 1785, he sought out John Newton, and he turned to him for counsel. John's wife, Mary, dies from cancer in 1790. Unfortunately, leaves him really with a great feeling of an experience of loss. John and Mary did not have any children of their own. They adopt two orphaned nieces on Mary's side of the family, two girls. He publishes other works. In 1764, he published an authentic narrative. In 1770, he publishes a review of ecclesiastical history. In 1784, he publishes an apologia, an apologetics work. In 1787, he publishes thoughts, again I mentioned earlier, thoughts on the African slave trade. And in 1793, he publishes one called Letters to a Wife. On December 21, 1807, John Newton dies peacefully at age 82. He's buried beside his beloved wife, Mary, in that church in Woolnoth, in London. So Amazing Grace is really kind of the key, the cornerstone of this video. Amazing Grace is the hymn that we most know John Newton for. The lyrics are basically, he said, they are basically his life story. From conversion to death, John tirelessly, in every aspect that he undertook, he pastored a church well. Everything that he tackled, he did it well and earnestly. And even though his vision was failing and he was overworked, his body sort of falling apart, many are trying to encourage him to retire and sort of take it easy. But in reply to this, he says, "My memory is nearly gone, but I remember two things, that I am a great sinner and that Christ is a great Savior." John Newton, describing his former life, would say that I sinned. I sinned with a high hand, and I made it my study to tempt and seduce others. So the next time you're singing Amazing Grace, recall not only the history behind this hymn, the grace that God extends to all sinners, including you and me, and that John Newton, whose hymn Amazing Grace that you have sung so many times, is a product of another Anglican you didn't know you knew.